Eu preciso que você pare e respire profundamente. Você pode fazer isso?
Quê? Por quê?
Por favor, peça a Deus para te dar.
At the time, the ruling power in the world was the Roman Empire. They have conquered and taken control of a lot of different peoples and lands, cultures and religions.
4 revolucionários condenados. Zelotes judeus. Deixe o governo para mim.
Pilate is the governor of Judea. His wife's name is Claudia, and they had originally been assigned to a different jurisdiction outside of the Middle East. Emperor Tiberius didn't really like Pilate because he was a little bit too brutal and he was a little bit entitled and just kind of like off-brand in a way.
Veja, meu problema com a reprimenda é que eu fui repreendido pelo meu uso da força.
And so as a punishment, he assigned him Judea because nobody wanted that crazy backwater town with those people and their one god and all this stuff. No, but it was a bit of a kick.
Uma péssima atribuição. Castigo até.
Acho que estamos dividindo a mesma cela.
Usually, they would impose their own religion on a conquered people and just be like, guess what? Now you worship our pantheon. Israel, God's chosen people, somehow ended up getting a very special treatment where they were allowed to continue with their own religion, but it was all very much still carefully monitored by Rome. For instance, Pilate would keep the garments of the high priest locked up until it was a festival, and then he would let them have them back. And it had to be a certain number of days before it so that they could make sure that they were ceremonially clean. And then when the festival or holiday like Passover or Rosh Hashanah was over, the governor, Pilate, would take the garments back and lock them up. As if to say, we let you observe this. Like, this is on our terms.
Peça-me qualquer coisa que você quiser. E eu lhe darei.
Herod's not really a king. He's just like what's called a client king. King in name only. Like the actual power is Rome. They let him serve as a king of the Jews, but he didn't really have that much power. Some, but not as much as the actual emperor.
Ele é de nós. Isso é ilegal. E eu não tenho medo dele. Ele pode não ser tão ruim quanto o pai era, mas ele ainda é ruim.
Herod the Great was his father. That was the guy who had all of the babies killed when the wise men came and said, a king of the Jews has been born in Bethlehem. He's like, well, then we gotta wipe out anyone under 2. And then his son, Herod Antipas, is the current client king of Galilee. Herodias is Herod Antipas's current wife. Herodias had been married to Herod Antipas's brother, Philip. And then she ended up marrying Herod Antipas, and John the Baptist viewed that as a kind of incest.
Eu vou marchar direto na corte dele e dizer isso na cara dele. Os meus seguidores vão adorar.
Você sabe como isso vai acabar, não é?
Herod Antipas put John the Baptist in prison to just get him out of the way, but Herodias, that wasn't enough for her.
Não mas 2 dos seus seguidores são ex-discípulos do falecido blasfemador João Batista. Falecido?
The American two-party system will not help you understand this at all. You might better look at just the vast array of denominations and every splinter in between. There's a lot of traditions within Judaism, but the key players are Sadducees, which are an aristocratic class, extremely wealthy religious Jews who probably have bought their way into the Sanhedrin, which is a governing body much like the Senate.
A riqueza e o status social dos saduceus tornam a sua interpretação muito conveniente.
Sua classe é tão confortável nesta vida. Por que deve se preocupar com o próximo?
The Sadducees do not believe in an afterlife. They only believe in the first 5 books of the Bible. It's kind of convenient for the Sadducees not to believe in an afterlife because they have such a comfortable life in the present. Next to them, you have the Pharisees, which are also part of the Sanhedrin.
Veja aqui. A leitura hiperliteral que os fariseus fazem do profeta Daniel é perigosa e tira a atenção.
They are more traditional, meaning they believe in all of the books of what we now call the Old Testament, but they also placed a lot of emphasis on extra biblical tradition. They came up with their own ideas about really, really strict rules of how we observe things, how we do things, and in the show we've had to differentiate from time to time. This is what's in Torah, and then this is rabbinic teachings.
Dar esmola é mais importante do que estar ritualmente limpo.
Estou dizendo que a sua obsessão pelo que é limpo e impuro vai mais longe do que Deus pretendia.
People think scribes are the people who just wrote stuff down.
Eu sei o que são escribas.
Not necessarily true. The scribes are like lawyers.
Também os chamamos de advogados.
That doesn't mean they would help you sue someone. They were lawyers in the sense that they interpreted the law and work with the Sanhedrin to make sure everything was legally sort of intact. And then of course the fourth philosophy, very fringe, the Zealots, off in their own weird extremist holes, making plans to murder people, not just Romans, but also Jewish officials whom they felt were too cozy with Rome.
Rabino Shammai, com todo o respeito, não viemos aqui hoje buscando influenciar as suas escolas de pensamento.
Se essa era a sua intenção, você conseguiu.
So Shammai is a Pharisee. He's a member of the Sanhedrin, which means he's a part of this governing body that makes decisions about temple life and culture. Shammai really wants to stick to the very traditional interpretation of the
Na
text.
festa dos tabernáculos, a filha de Shammai deu à luz a um filho, Shmuel. Ele subiu no telhado do quarto onde ela e o menino estavam e abriu buraco no gesso só para fazer uma sucá.
He had people who were like in his school of thought, fellow Pharisees who agreed with his interpretation and wanted basically for nothing to change. A rabbi 300 years ago said observing Sabbath should be done this way and not deviated from, and then he would point to that as precedent, much like our Supreme Court might do today for a decision that's been handed down in the past, perhaps before any of them were even born. So in Shammai's school of thought, we're dwelling heavily on tradition and precedent and previous rabbis.
A casa do infeliz avô dele, Hillel, vai cair. E a casa de Shammai se erguerá.
Hillel represents the opposite spectrum of Shammai. Hillel wanted to reform the traditions that had bubbled up and become conflated with Torah. Hillel wanted to make changes. He was like, some of this stuff is really hard on our people. We need to make reforms. And when someone like Jesus comes along, Hillel and his school of thought were more open to progressing things beyond the way they just always had been done. Whereas the school of Shammai was like, no, we're never changing.
No sentido de que são as principais autoridades na lei sagrada de Moisés, intérpretes e árbitros da...
The role of the high priest was to be an intercessor between the people and God. The high priest was the only person in all of Israel who on the Day of Atonement could enter the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God dwells. The highest religious figure in the religious order of Judaism. Caiaphas is the current serving high priest of Israel. He is the son-in-law of Annas, who is the former high priest, which created some strife in the family and some kind of whispers among town, like why did the son-in-law get it and not like one of that? He had a bunch of other sons that he could have chosen. It is a role that sends back generations through a particular family. Caiaphas married into this family and then got the job. He wasn't technically a descendant of Aaron or the Levites. Kind of shady.
Esta reunião está encerrada. Caiaphas, este relatório está inflado e distorcido com intenções tendenciosas.
Eu disse que terminamos aqui, Shimon.